inspiration, conversation with dream accomplishers. Tune in on Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Write your goals down and then chase them. Tune in for your weekly motivation. On air with DeAndrea. Hey, on air with DeAndrea. Tune in for your weekly motivation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dream on Air with DeAndrea. I am your host, DeAndrea Kidd, and in honor of Black Women's History Month, I have decided to highlight many Black female pioneers throughout history who have made many remarkable contributions to the advancement of the Black race and all races in our country. We live in a society today where most Black women aren't respected unless it comes to our bodies or unless we're being mocked or disgraced. And I'm tired of seeing the lack of appreciation, to be honest. So for this month, we're going to talk about many remarkable contributions that Black women have made for our communities and our families and the race as a whole. I believe that these contributions need to be talked about just to kind of help shed light on the beauty of Black women and how much of a blessing we are, to be honest, if you ask me. So joining me today on today's episode is none other than the Dr. Coiette Gaston of Prairie View A&M University, and she's going to dive deeper into the history of Black women and the contributions that were made by Black women throughout history. So everybody give a warm welcome to Dr. Gaston.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Very happy to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being here. So let's go ahead and get right off in today's episode. So, Dr. Gaston, the month of April is Black Women's History Month, and I just wanted to have you here today to kind of talk to our audience about some contributions that were made by Black women throughout history. I also want you to kind of share your story of becoming a doctor. I know y'all heard that doctor in front of her name. Just talk to us about what inspired you to get your doctorates and how was that experience for you?
Well, it's a very common theme in my life that my inspiration comes from other women, the Black women around me, the Black women that I have read about. But the person who inspired me to get my doctorate was my mother. She also has an EDD. She received hers from Texas Southern University a few years ago. Well, it's longer than a few years ago, but you catch my drift. And she continued to kind of encourage me to go the doctoral route. And I really wasn't with it at first. It was a lot of work, and I saw her go through the process, and I was very nervous and kind of skeptical about it. But it happened to be that one day her and I were taking a walk and we were talking about doctoral school and the opportunities that it could open up for me. And there was a woman walking behind us who overheard our conversation. And she mentioned that she was in doctoral school at the moment and that I should look into the program that she was in. And I did and got accepted. And so, the rest was history. But shout out to Dr. Tammy Smithers. She's the one who pushed me that last little push.
Yes, shout out to her. And I'm very grateful even to hear your experience about how you were able to kind of have that support system around you. I feel like that's very important in the community of, just even being a Black woman, for us to have women around who can kind of nurture us and kind of help guide us in the right direction. So in the pursuit of getting your PhD, were there any struggles that you endured or especially as a Black woman, like how was that experience?
Well, first, I do have an EDD, not a PhD, and I want to just state that difference because the PhDs get mad sometimes when we don't clarify. But an EDD is a doctorate of education, and I have a doctorate of education in ethical leadership. But as far as my experience in the doctoral program, I know that folks love a good underdog story, but that wasn't my experience. Actually, my program was really, really great. It was really, really diverse. Actually, there were more women in my cohort than there were men. and it was very diverse racially, religiously, as far as sexuality goes. So we had a good time having these conversations from various perspectives. I got my doctorate from the University of St. Thomas, and the doctors who coordinated that program did a really good job of walking us through the process and being there for us, giving us advice, helping us with the rewrites, helping us with tailoring our research. So as a Black woman, I really had a great time in that program because they were extremely progressive when it came to social justice, and they often encouraged us to dig into those sorts of things because for them, they would often say that, these degrees are not just for, decoration on your wall, but they wanted us to be able to apply what we learned in some way. And that's one of the things that I actually appreciate about having an EDD versus a PhD. PhD is often focused more on theoretical research, whereas an EDD is more about the practical application of that research. So the EDD kind of allows you to get your hands dirty, if you will.
Yes, and thank you for that information because I did not know. Wow, that is amazing. And even hearing that experience, it helps show how beautiful diversity can also be when people come together and when there is unity instead of division, or when there is unity and everybody is seen as equal, those opportunities are able to be enjoyed. Like you said, you were able to receive the help with, the rewrites, and you guys were able to come together and share each other's experiences and perspectives without having to worry about, being accepted. It seemed like they were very accepting of you as a Black woman, and that's very important when it comes to us in the pursuit of our education and in our work fields. So if you could give any encouragement, what would you say to other Black women who are in pursuit of their doctorates, who may be going through, the decision of maybe, is this something that I want to pursue? EDD, that is a doctorate, right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, what encouragement could you give other Black women who are in pursuit of their doctorates, who maybe, kind of consider if it's for them or not? Like, what would you say?
For those who may be considering a doctorate degree, whether that's an EDD or whether that's a PhD, I would definitely say try to narrow in on your research area earlier in the game. It's very difficult to start doing that after you've taken all of your classes. So kind of know what you are looking for, know what you're interested in. I would also say visit with programs. Don't just apply. See what they offer, see what their specialties are, see what possible funding that they have. Because my program, it was from a private school, so it was not funded, which means all of us had to come up with that money. I would tell Black women to, when you get into your program, listen. Mm-hmm. Do not think that you know more than you do. Those people who are standing in front of you in the classroom, sometimes they may annoy you. Sometimes they may say something that you don't like. But at the end of the day, they know how to get you to the next step. Right. So humble yourself, okay, and appreciate that you have access to all of this information, because you do learn how to think differently in doctoral school. I think you should definitely embrace that. Go in with an open mind, because as you go through the process of writing your dissertation, your mind is going to work as if you're always writing a dissertation. So every problem that you come across, you're going to be thinking of a theory. You're going to be thinking of, the problem question. You're going to be thinking of the central question. You're going to be thinking of demographics. Who does this affect? You definitely want to be open to that so that you can have the full experience, and so you can hone those skills for when you get out into the research field, whether that be in academia, nonprofits, or otherwise.
Wow. Yes, ma'am. That was some great advice. I'm even sitting here listening to you now like, wow. Even having this conversation kind of opened my mind too, because I have to learn, yes, we have come a long way from, slavery and, discrimination, but wow, there are women who have been able to have a positive experience in our country. And yeah, I think it's very great that you are here today, so you can kind of share that with us and, give us some hope. It's been amazing. So Dr. Gaston, you're also a history professor here at Prairie View, and it seems like you have quite a few roles here at Prairie View A&M University. So what is your favorite thing about being here and being able to teach history at an HBCU?
Well, one of my favorite things about being at Prairie View is I'm a former student. So I really relish the idea of getting to come back to my old stomping grounds, see what's new, see what the students are interested in now versus what I was interested in then. And another thing that I like about being here is that I do get to have certain conversations that I might not get to have at another university or another institution. I love talking to Black students and introducing them to history that includes how they feel, what they've experienced, and also helping them be more aware of the history that they were not exposed to in their K through 12 education. I try to make sure my classes are a place where students do feel comfortable expressing their thought processes, and I want to try to not influence their thoughts necessarily, but at least try to help them hone in or construct their thoughts so that they can be properly articulated. Because one day somebody is going to ask you what you think, and I don't want my students, Prairie View students, to have a lot of bad information. I want them to be speaking from a place of credible resources.
That's beautiful, the way that you structure your lectures to be for us as students, to not only just have our, I guess, opinions, but making sure that there are facts given, and also making sure that we still have that room to still express ourselves and develop our own thoughts. I know kind of growing up, maybe some of our history hadn't been taught to us, because I know it wasn't for me. Like when I grew up in elementary school and middle school, even in high school, we didn't really hear much about Black history unless it was during Black History Month. And they only really talked to us about Martin Luther King and maybe a little bit of Malcolm X, you know? And so it's just been amazing to kind of learn the contributions that we did make to this country and kind of seeing our history shed in a positive manner, like showing the reform that happened through civil rights movement and the Black Panther Party movement, through the even learning about the contributions that the women have made. You know, that's not something that we get taught. We kind of get taught handed down history, especially when we were in high school and middle school. We only learned what was in the history books, but to actually come here and learn new information, learning that I didn't just come from slaves. Like I came from families, I came from hard workers, I came from people who actually cared for their future generations. I came from people who actually put in the work to be the pioneers to create new opportunities and better living situations for their youth or for the upcoming generation. So I know that I have learned a lot about that, which has been very inspirational to me. I also want to make sure that whatever I do with my life, that I also put myself in a position to where I can be there to create better opportunities for the generations that come after me. And that's another thing that I've been learning. This is kind of a side note, but it's like where you come from, that doesn't always have to be your forever. You know, it's just, that's your history, but that doesn't have to be your future. It's about what you do with your right now that would determine where you will end up later, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. I do think that sometimes when we talk about the history of Black people, particularly Black people being enslaved in the United States, we feel ashamed of it. And I don't like that notion, because we have to give those people credit. They were snatched completely away from everything that was familiar to them. And still, through the labor, through the brutality, through discrimination, managed to create a culture that is the most influential culture in the world. And that the reason, or this is just my thinking, but the reason that Black people are constantly attacked, I feel, is because people don't really understand how we've been able to do it, how we've been able to maintain that influence, how we've been able to maintain some of that ethnic and racial pride, regardless of how people feel around us. Specifically, Black women have done a wonderful job with that, embracing not only Black culture, but the Black feminine and all that has accomplished and stood for and protected during our experience here.
Yes, ma'am. Oh my gosh. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to kind of take that time to highlight Black women this month. So throughout history, we know that Black women have also contributed a lot to the advancement of our race and, you know, just advocating for ourselves, especially during the civil rights and the Black Panther Party movement. So can you share with us who some of those women may have been during those times and what was it that they contributed?
So, Unfortunately, we do not talk enough about how Black women were the backbone of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was not this spontaneous thing that just happened and these people just showed up. It took a lot of planning. It took a lot of strategizing. It took a lot of organizing for these things to go as well as they did. And Black women tended to have a large hand in that. One of the things that seems to have surprised my students this semester is that the Black Panther Party was at least 60% women. Typically, when we see those images of the Black Panther Party, we are only looking at men, and we're not considering that the free breakfast program and the, community schools and all of these extra services that the Black Panther Party provided were heavily done by the women of that party. And when it comes to confrontation, Black women were a part of that as well. But this idea of Black women being a major or integral part of freedom fights or even maintenance of culture is not just something that began in the United States. Going back to the British invading Ghana, you had Yaa Asantewaa, who said, if the men won't fight, the women will. You had Nzinga of Angola, who fought off the Portuguese for the entirety of her reign. You had lots of different women who were very much on the forefront of making sure that Black culture, or at least in the instance of those previous two examples, that these countries and these kingdoms were at least attempted to maintain themselves under the threat of white supremacy, colonialism, and the slave trade. But as far as our kind of modern civil rights movement, one of my favorite people is Fannie Lou Hamer. I believe that she should be talked about every single time Mississippi politics comes up. She was an activist from Mississippi, and she was involved in a number of organizations, including the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She ran for the Mississippi House of Representatives in 1964. Now, unfortunately, her name was not put on the ballot, and that is one of those cases of just outright political discrimination. She was also a member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She joined that organization in 1962. Fannie Lou Hamer helped to organize the Freedom Summer in Mississippi in 1964, where she and other volunteers of all racial backgrounds helped to, or attempted to help Black voters in Mississippi get registered. She created a pig bank for Mississippi farmers in 1968 to give Black farmers pigs so they could raise, breed, and sell them. She also created the Freedom Farm Cooperative in 1969 and was one of the founding members of the National Caucus in 1971. Her work came to an end in the 1970s because unfortunately she did pass away from breast cancer in 1977. But she was one of these civil rights activists who walked right into the danger of activism. I mean, she was constantly harassed by the police. She was sent to jail where other activists were forced to beat her, and she sustained those injuries until her death. I mean, she was forcibly sterilized without her consent. She had surgery to remove a tumor, and they removed her uterus as well without asking her. So they took away her ability to have children, which was a state-sponsored thing where they said, or the state of Mississippi said, that we didn't need any more poor Black people, and so they would forcibly sterilize Black women, and that was something that happened all over the South. And sterilization was something that happened across the United States to many different marginalized groups.
Wow, that's a lot of history there. And even I'm grateful that we have people like her who kind of advocate for us, who are willing to go out in the forefronts and to really, not be intimidated by the change that they wanted to see, or be intimidated by the backlash from the change that they were advocating for. Even to just know that she was able to endure all of those things, even when her rights were, when people went against her rights, they did everything that they could to try to stop her or to try to intimidate her. But she prevailed. She kept going forth. And through that, even hearing about how she started the pig farm, I thought that was pretty amazing. That kind of reminds me of now in today's time where our families are learning about how to create generational wealth for ourselves. So she did that for her community. And that was very creative. I mean, even with the farm and agriculture industry, them being able to make money off of their livestock, that was very smart and admirable. And that goes also to show why it's important to have people like her in our community to think even in new ways. Because one thing you'll have to learn, like especially this is one thing that I'm learning, like especially when there's adversity, you have to learn how to go around it. You can't let adversity stop you, or even in situations like that, unfortunately for her, with them removing her uterus without her consent, and even with, other people being able to kind of violate her, having her rights, that they did that to try to silence her. And unfortunately that happened to a lot of Black women. I'm just so grateful that she was able to persevere past those things, even considering the mental aspect of it. Who knows how that could have affected her mentally, and how that affects some people mentally. How like situations like that with losing your rights and not being able to advocate for yourself can kind of toy on one's mental.
Well, Black women have been put in a very unique situation where we have had to become the kind of protectors and the stand guard for our community. If you go back to the time of enslavement, Black women had to take on that role of protector because we were able to navigate some of the atrocities of slavery a little bit differently because of our gender. And even though Black women had been vilified for it, Black female sexuality was one of those tools that Black women would use to try to make their lives more bearable under that system of slavery, and make their children's lives more bearable. And so there is this kind of seems like innate push in many Black women from those years and from today, that we have to say something, we have to do something, we have to keep going, which in some ways does negatively affect us and our mental health, because that's a lot of stress to be kind of the leaders of lots of social justice movements. And it's really disheartening, because if we were smart in the United States, we would know that what's good for Black women is good for everyone, and we would just push that. But instead, Black women seem to have to fight this continuous uphill battle when all we're trying to do is make life better for ourselves and those around us.
Yes, exactly. And I'm very humbled to hear stories like that. And also to my generation, for those who are listening, this is why it's very vital to make sure that we respect our elders, not only Black women, of course, elders of all kinds. But when you think about the history of a Black woman and how we've had to learn how to survive, how we've had to learn how to, push through and persevere, there's this notion of being the strong Black woman that a lot of people talk about today. We kind of have to. So the clear point that I want to make is that although we have come from a very difficult and hard history, we can now continue the pursuit of making sure that in spite of those difficulties or in spite of those adversities, that we still take care of ourselves, that we still come together as a community, especially as Black women, to support each other and to keep each other uplifted, even through the struggles that we may have faced. And even in the good times, it's also good, once again, going back to the support system. It's important to have those group of friends, or to have that mother, or to have that mother figure, or somebody around who can kind of uplift you, because this is a struggle that, all Black women have experienced in some shape, form, or fashion, whether we have experienced it directly, or maybe we come from somebody who had to kind of be strong and push through, some very difficult life situations that other people may not, have had to experience. So Dr. Gaston, considering all that we have talked about, in what ways have you also seen Black women overcome the stereotypes of discrimination and slavery, things like unfair pay wages? Like, in what ways have you seen Black women prevail past those things?
Well, definitely Black women take their education quite seriously. Black women are some of the most educated, or one of the most educated demographics in the United States. Black women are just coming through and they are picking up these degrees. Black women are also building for themselves economically. So that includes entrepreneurship. Black women are the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the United States. Now, unfortunately, many Black women do have to self-fund their businesses because of systemic financial discrimination. However, Black women who are successful in those businesses are doing what you said, creating that generational wealth. Another thing that I really, really like, and I see Black women of all ages doing this, but primarily millennials and Gen Z Black women, is creating these kind of safe spaces online. I love to watch the TikToks about the Black girl in luxury. I love the soft life hashtag, and Black women making a concerted effort to show themselves in different lights, because that strong Black woman trope is not good. Black women do not want to be considered strong. We would actually, well, I'll speak for myself, but I would actually prefer not to have that label, because people think that they can treat Black women any kind of way because they are strong. And so I do appreciate Black women being very, very intentional about showing themselves in good positions, showing themselves being taken care of, showing themselves achieving things without having to go through certain hardships, or, like you said, supporting one another and kind of blocking those hardships from one another. Black women are definitely our best support system because we relate to one another, and that just doesn't mean trauma bonding. That means that you have, suburban Black girls, you have country Black girls, you have for lack of a better term, city Black girls who have very varied experiences based on their socioeconomic background, based off of their ethnicity, based on what region they grew up in. And they're saying that, yes, there are certain hardships that come along with systemic discrimination, but we still can create these spaces where we feel heard, we feel validated, and we project images that we want to see of ourselves.
Right. Wow, and that's beautiful. And it's like now we have the time to see ourselves in those good in good light. And I love that for us. And
you know what? I want to add one point though. I'm doing a lot of rewatching of old TV shows and films from like the 90s and the 80s, and I would argue that the representation isn't that bad, especially when you look at certain sitcoms and certain shows. So I would definitely, I definitely like to see that representation, or I want to talk about that representation because it wasn't all negative stereotypes that came out about Black women. The public like to continue those negative stereotypes, but you had shows like Girlfriends, you had shows like Living Single, you had shows like Half and Half and Moesha and the Parkers that showed these Black women being upwardly mobile, living these lives that don't involve a bunch of struggle. And so I definitely appreciate that I got to grow up with that kind of content.
Right. And even watching those shows, like just seeing us happy and peaceful and enjoying our families, enjoying our lives. Even you mentioned the Parkers. I love watching that show. I pay attention to little details. So even the way that they dress, like the fashion, they look nice. The hairdos was nice. They were just able to express themselves, and it was just very free for them. And that's exactly the example that I like to have, even considering my life as a Black woman. So I thank you for mentioning that. I'm very grateful for this conversation today too, because it helped redirect my mentality about us even. And so Dr. Gaston, I kind of want to get into what we as students can do now to ensure that not only we are continuing to see ourselves in this good light, but also to ensure that our rights and our resources are protected.
Two of the biggest things are to read everything. I say this in class when I discuss Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, that those men read all the time. Reading is truly it's the cheat code, because everything that you think you've experienced, that you have experienced, that you want to experience, somebody else has already experienced it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go and find out what somebody else has experienced, what they thought about it, and then apply that to your life accordingly. You can you can avoid a lot of mistakes by reading and listening to people who came before you. So I encourage students to read, to listen. Information is available through so many outlets these days. So I would definitely say keep abreast through reading articles, reading podcasts, so that you know what's coming. Excuse me, not reading podcasts, listening to podcasts. But you will know what's coming down the pipeline. Some suggestions for podcasts, because I like these, are Higher Learning with Van Lathan and Rachel Lindsay, Black News Tonight with Mark Lamont Hill, Pod Save America, Some More News. Those podcasts do a really great job of breaking down the content into an easily digestible format. Let's see, websites like The Griot, News One, Blavity, Atlanta Black Star. Those websites focus on Black news or things that specifically affect Black America. I would say that students need to be activists both on and off your phone. It's great to hashtag. It is great to repost. It is great to get the word out via social media. But if the people that you're trying to gain attention from aren't online, they never hear you. So you definitely have to make your voice heard outside of those online avenues. Don't dismiss them. Definitely use them. But join an organization. Your campus is full of organizations for you to join. Make sure that you are calling or finding out who your local representatives are. Get registered to vote in Waller County and be an active voter. Don't just vote in those big federal elections or national elections. Vote for the sheriff. Vote for the comp controller. Vote for these local positions that are going to affect your life much more than what's ever going on in Washington.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And so where can we kind of... Well, you gave us a lot of great resources. So I know for me, sometimes when the elections run, I don't know like when they're happening. Like I know they say vote for the sheriff or vote for, our representatives. But how do we know what time of the year those happen? Or I know for myself personally, sometimes when elections come around, I don't know what's going on. We are up next. The laws and the policies that are being discussed now, these will affect us as adults. And I'm in this transition stage from being laxed and not, just, I don't want to say living in la la land, but I'm starting to pay more attention to what's happening around me. And so for students who are like me, who may not be, that informed about when the elections are happening, like, how do we know?
And I think this is where your generation's knowledge of technology will really come into play for you all. Google alerts. Make Google alerts for local elections. There's an app called Causes, and on that app you can just put in your zip code, and it will tell you who all your local officials are, what bills are coming up. The internet is a wonderful place. I think my biggest suggestion is that Google alerts. Once you have that set up, you get a ding every time something of that nature comes up. And also, I would suggest that students review the university website. The university is very frequently putting out information, not just concerning things on campus, but things off campus as well. And I think that would help a lot of students, because the few times I've asked in my class, do we look at the website? The answer was a resounding no. So we should probably peruse that a little bit more often.
Yes, and I know I am. I need to, and that I will. So, Dr. Gaston, thank you so much for your time and contribution to not only the classroom, but just taking the time out to come today to Dream on Air to share this refreshing perspective as a Black woman in our society. It is so relieving to know that we have female educators who ensure the truth about our history is being taught, but also that ensures that we are uplifted and empowered and reminded of the essence that we have as students here at this HBCU campus. So once again, I would like to thank you so much for joining me today. And if there is any last piece of advice that you could give students at PVAMU, what would that be?
Well, one thing I can think of, and this pertains to not just students at PV, but the Black community and Black women in general, when we're interacting with each other and when we're interacting when we're interacting with each other, let's give each other a little grace, because mental stress does show up differently in us than it does in other groups. And so certain attitudes or being short or, irksomeness that people might perceive as a bad Black woman attitude, it might be her struggling. It might be her dealing with something that she doesn't quite know how to express. That's something that I try to keep in mind when my students get a little sassy with me. And as far as PV students, though, I would say, and I guess this is because I am the older generation now, but don't dismiss the older generation. Older people are not all out to get you, okay? Your professors are not out to get you. We gain nothing if you don't do well. We want you to succeed because it makes your life better. And of course, it's great for the university to have these successful people coming from here. And I do want to reiterate, as students, your college experience is completely up to you. The effort that you put into it is the effort that you will get out of it. And so if you want to have these life-changing experiences, if you want to know more about Black history, if you want to go to internships or go on trips, you have to be in the place where those things are happening. So come to class. Those are that's where these sorts of things are talked about. Go to office hours. Don't just show up at your professor's office when you're having an issue or because you want extra credit. Get to know these people because they have connections that you might not know about that could be very beneficial to your matriculation here and your success once you graduate.
Well, yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gaston. Thank you for that great advice. This episode was very refreshing for me. And yes, so once again, you guys have been tuned in to Dream on Air with DeAndrea. Dr. Gaston, you got any final words for the people?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being a part of this platform, and stay Black.
Stay Black. We out.
Conversation with dream accomplishers. Tune in on Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Write your goals down.